Molt bona tarda. Si us sembla, començaríem l'acte de la nova Disputatio, que sempre és un moment interessant, que té de títol Disconnection between Science and Society, European Crisis. First of all, thank you very much to Academia Europaea and Jaume Bertran Petit and Patricia de Lis and Massimiano Bucchi and Gloria Origgi to share with us your thoughts and your speech about this subject. The last week we did Bienal Ciencia en Ciutat, really successful, and we're working together with Madrid, Mexico, and Barcelona, and we focus with quantic computing or quantics. We try to understand quantic, and it seemed really difficult because in reality, something is trust and something it's not trust. The same situation will be yes and no at the same time. But in any case, Richard Feynman says, if you think you understand quantics, you have an enormous mistake because you don't understand quantics. But in any case, today we discuss about trust, doubt, and facts. And this subject, it's really difficult for me to explain in English, more difficult for me explaining in Catalan, and I move to Catalan right now. Avui volem parlar de conceptes que ens afecten a nosaltres, que és la veritat, el dubte, els fets. I hi ha algunes expressions que tant en Massimiano Bucchi com Gloria Origgi, però també en Philip Ball, aquests dies durant la Bienal de Ciència han aparegut que jo crec que són interessants. Ens movem una era que passem de l'era de la informació a l'era de la reputació, realment què és cert o què no és cert. No existeix tant una crisi de la ciència, sinó que existeix una crisi dels fets, pròpiament, de què és i què no és, en realitat. I que la ciència treballa, i això és cert, amb veritats que són provisionals sempre, perquè en la mesura que aprenem més, les veritats es van transformant en si mateixes. És a dir, els fets que descobreix la ciència no són fets immutables, sinó que poden variar amb la mesura que tens més informació i canvia. I aquesta és una cita que jo crec que és important, i és que la ciència no és una màquina de certeses, sinó que és un procés de dubte. Jo crec que actualment podríem dir que el dubte és revolucionari en un món que tothom vol, no sé si el que vol és tenir fe en el que creu, però si no li agrada el que la realitat li demostra, no l'accepta i busca una realitat que l'acomodi directament amb ell. Doncs la ciència es mou en aquests entorns. Nosaltres estem pensant en aquests moments, i té molt a veure amb les jornades que farem avui, amb què farem amb la Bienal de Ciència de l'any que ve. I una de les coses que li estem donant voltes, no està decidit encara, és si parlarem de ciència i democràcia, que té a veure també, bàsicament, amb el que avui discutirem. En tot cas, jo agrair tenir aquesta nova Disputatio aquí a l'Ajuntament, que recuperem una miqueta les Disputatios de fa segles que hi havia en aquesta ciutat, que n'hi va haver-hi alguna, aquesta ciutat, em sembla que era el segle XIV, que n'hi va haver-hi una ja, i n'hi havia hagut unes anteriorment a Suïssa. Recuperem una miqueta aquest debat intel·lectual i reforcem una miqueta la posició de Barcelona com una ciutat que defensa la ciència i que no li té cap mena de dubte ni de por a discutir, ni tampoc a tenir dubtes. Moltes gràcies i endavant la Disputatio.
Molt bona tarda a tothom. Thank you very much, Jordi Banys, for your introduction. And today we are here for one of these big events that are being organized by the Academia Europaea. So Academia Europaea is an European-wide and larger than that organization in Europe, and it has several hubs. One of the main hubs, they said that the most active one, is in Barcelona. And in this hub, we organize several things. So we organize a set of talks in which we always put together the views of different people, one, for example, a scientist, and the other one more philosophical or social view of it. And in general, we have this discussion every month, and we keep going for two things. One is to disseminate the knowledge into the population, and the other one that we do one in Catalan or Spanish, the other one in English, and the one in English always retransmitted online to show to Europe the science we are doing here and the discussions we are doing here. The Disputatio that we have today is a very special one in the sense that first, the place, which is really amazing, so is one of the rooms in which, if you don't want to listen, just watching around is really interesting. These paintings are by Josep Maria Sert, a very known painter. He has two main places in which you can admire beyond here. One is the Cathedral of Vic, and the other one is the Rockefeller Center in New York. What is amazing is that most people know better the New York place than the big place, but the three of them are really, really interesting and amazing. The Disputatio, why we are here. So the idea is that there are themes in which we can say things from the academia that are many times not considered enough to take decisions. The idea is that the things that happens day by day may have an interesting view from academics, from people that have been thinking and writing and talking on that have to be considered. I remember very well that when he was alive, Jorge Wagensberg, a person very widely known here, he used to say, we are at the end of the time in which political and social decisions are taken without a scientific base. And we are seeing that he was wrong, totally wrong. So unfortunately, he was wrong in the sense that the movements we are seeing in the last years are really movements that were not expected and that depart in big amounts the vision that we have for many problems on science. We had here 2 years ago one disputatio on the origin of violence, and it was a time in which the issue was really important. Last year it was on misinformation, fake news, and this kind of topic. And today, as you have seen, we have another interesting discussion, as Jordi Banks said before, on the extent in which there is a disconnection between science and society. So what is science every time more and more keep being something that is good for themselves, but is not something that is being taken into consideration for general discussions, for general decisions. So today we have this disputatio, and we are very happy to have with us two of the main scholars in Europe working on that. And before that, we decided, as we did in other disputatios, to have an artistic view, a musical view, and in this case we are going to have a piece at initial and a piece at the end. So the piece at the initial it will be by Leclerc, and it's a piece that will remind you the beginning of enlightenment in Europe. So the idea would be the Enlightenment by Leclerc. These are three movements. Let's go the three movements without applauding in between. And then we'll have the disputatio, and at the end we'll have another work also in three parts, and this one is a musical piece that has been done in the last days. So it's by the composer is Puig Caminal. He's a person, I don't see him, is here. So we are very happy that you have been able to come here. And also it will be done in three parts. So that's the introduction, and my main point here is to introduce you the person that is going to moderate the Disputatio, which is Patricia Fernández de Lis. She is a science correspondent in El País, so she's the person that is working for El País in science, and she's going to conduct and present the persons, the disputantes in that. Thank you very much. Patricia, the floor is yours.
So thank you, Jaume. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I think the first thing we are going to do is the music, right? So I'm going to shut up. I just came here because you asked me, but I think I'm going to shut up and let the music play. Thank you. I will come back afterwards. Wow, thank you. Thank you really very, very much, Elizabeth and Sarah. Thank you for this incredible interpretation. I feel already enlightened. I don't know about you, but it has been wonderful. Thank you so much. So, as Jaume said, Patricia Fernández de Lis, I'm a journalist from El País, and it's my honor to be here today this beautiful Saló de Crónicas, in the heart of Barcelona City Hall, magnificent, to moderate what promises to be a fascinating conversation about one of the most pressing questions of our time. Is there truly a crisis of trust between science and society in Europe? We live in a paradoxical moment, I think. In one hand, science has never been more present in our daily lives, from smartphones to the vaccines that protect us in the pandemic. On the other hand, we have constantly fake news, disinformation, vaccine hesitancy, and the supposed disconnection between experts and citizens. So we have today two real exceptional researchers who have dedicated their careers to understand these questions from different but complementary perspectives. I am going to present, allow me to present our first speaker, Professor Massimiano Bucchi. He's, I hope, here. He's not with us today. He can't join us, he couldn't join us, but really, really thank him for being with us today. I don't know, Massimiano, if you hear us. Are you there?
I do.
Hi, Massimiano. Thank you very much for being here and for your time. I'm going to do a brief presentation. He is from the University of Trento in Italy. Massimiano is one of Europe's leading scholars in science communication and public understanding of science. His work challenges many of the stereotypes we hold about the public engages with science. He will present his perspective on what the data really tell us about trust, interest, sorry, and misinformation. Massimiano, whenever you want, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this invitation. I am truly sorry not to be able to be in this beautiful hall with you due to a health issue in my family, but I'll do my best to contribute. And I would like to highlight some stereotypes that are involved in the discussion about science in society today. And I will start from what a visible scientist, a Nobel laureate, says. Giorgio Parisi, Italian physics laureate in physics, wrote in The Guardian about the world losing trust in scientists like him. And what is the evidence of this crisis of trust, some negative comments he received on Facebook. So it's a pity that such great scientists and several other scientists and commentators and policymakers not look very much at the data, because we have a lot of data to challenge a few stereotypes: lack of trust in science, scientific expertise, lack of interest and ability to understand science content, dependence on social media, and the so-called infodemic. I don't like very much the term fake news. So I'm going to argue that we have problems, we have challenges, but to understand the challenges, we have to go beyond the stereotypes. And the first stereotypes is the lack of trust. We have data, consistent data in many countries, Germany, Sweden, here in this picture, that citizens in Europe, and not just in Europe, have a high trust in science. Even in the United States of the Trump age, trust in scientists is much higher than those, for example, in journalists, governmental leaders. This is about Spain from FECIT. Similar trends, similar results, consistent and rising during the pandemic. This is from Italy, and here you see one of the real problems we should face. There is trust in science, in research institutions, in scientists, but there is a problem when, for example, as we have seen during the pandemic, when the scientists, maybe not prepared for the responsibility of public communication, go to the front of communication on social media or television. There we have a problem. Is it true that citizens are illiterate, as we say, about science? Again, the answer is no. These are the trends in Italy, the science literacy index, very similar in most European countries. It's been rising slightly in the last decades, and mostly because the younger generation are more educated. Interest in participating, for example, in science events, that's another indicator. Interest to learning more about science through a variety of sources. 70% of people are willing to do so. Similar data in Spain, Italy, other countries. This is the Eurobarometer. Do people actually rely on social media, particularly when it comes to serious issues like health, vaccination? Again, the answer is no. From the Eurobarometer, they may use a lot social media for other things, for looking at strange or silly or funny things, or to comment, but when it comes to serious information, they don't really trust social media. Of course, I am aware that social media encompasses a great variety of content, and we should never forget that. But the stereotype that people rely on social media for their decisions, also about science and health, is just doesn't hold. And the same, the data from the FACEIT, they tell us a very similar thing. Misinformation, which is often related to distrust in science, is an interesting result from interviews with economic leaders. Is considered very important priority, even more than climate change or environmental problems. People perceive a lot of preoccupation about social media. Again, this is the Eurobarometer. But then when we look at the data, as I said, how much misinformation there is around in the news media, how much people pay attention to these, the results are very critical. And maybe you remember this study, which is one of the most cited study when it comes to misinformation, the idea that false news spread faster than true news, so to say. This has been widely criticized, is now considered a highly controversial study for the method they used, because they didn't use actually false news, but contested news. There's a very good study by Altai and other scholars, which is completely questioning these and also highlighting the so-called third-person effect, the perception that misinformation is a problem, but the others are misinformed. It's a way of projecting, again, stereotype on others. So there are 5 misconceptions. There's this very important paper which is called Misinformation About Misinformation. Misinformation is not just a social media problem. The impact on behavior is often exaggerated. People may be uninformed on many political issues rather than misinformed. It's not true that falsehoods spread faster than the truth. And again, I mean, this is quite obvious to those who study media and communication. People do not believe everything they see on the internet or social media. So let me finish by raising a question that I think it's very important as a sociologist. Despite such data, why a representation of the public as skeptical, ignorant, and distrustful? And again, I'm sure you remember how much we have seen of these comments by policymakers, scientists, commentators. I can highlight 3 reasons. First of all, ignorance and prejudice. They don't bother to look at the data, like Professor Parisi, misinformation about misinformations. Political reason. If you project the stereotype of an ignorant, stupid public opinion, you shift the blame from institutional failure to the media and to the audiences. Take, for example, the case of Brexit. Why people voted for the Brexit? Because of fake news on social media. So you completely exempt all the European institutions from their failures in communication. Ideological reasons. It supports a paternalistic and authoritarian vision of science communication, of science and society. And so you don't need, the people who believe in this, they do not need to improve the quality of science communication because it's always a fault of the audience and of the media. And this instead should be, in my view, one of the main challenges that we have to face, because we have a challenge. It is the quality of science communication. How can we improve it? How can we reward it? How can we distinguish from improvised science communication with unclear aims and limited intelligence of the context? And again, we have seen a lot of this during the pandemic. There is an educational channel. How do we build awareness for the quality of information in general and its value and cost in an age where everyone complains about the quality of information, but nobody wants to pay? This is a paradox. And finally, to get beyond the paternalistic view and stereotypes about publics and audiences of science communication. Thank you.
Presentation and for keeping it brief, and thank you very much for being with us once again. After this presentation, we'll hear a different perspective on the same question. We'll hear from Professor Gloria Origgi. She is from the CNRS in Paris. Gloria is a philosopher and a cognitive scientist whose work explores reputation, trust, and epistemic authority. She will offer a compelling argument about why what we call a crisis of trust might actually be a crisis of authority. Gloria, please. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So how do I move this thing with this, like this? Okay, thanks a lot. Actually, I'm not going to present such a different perspective from Massimiano Bucchi, because it is true, what he says is profoundly true. There is a lot of misinformation and misconception about misinformation and distrust in science, etc. Actually, as he was saying, I just can confirm, if I'm able to move this thing. Does it work like this? Does anyone know how to go? I've been given this one, but I not know how to make it. Well, let me see. Nothing happens. Well, as he was saying, I have pretty much the same data. Well, I don't know how it worked, so maybe it's going to be the same thing for next time, so stay around. I have basically the same data for Europe, like from Eurobarometer, which is quite a reliable source, that most people, at least in Europe, trust science, and Massimiano was right to say that even in the United States, that may seem sort of paradoxical given the situation, the present situation of the present administration and the attack of science of the present administration, still the majority of Americans trust science. And that is clearly true for Europeans. I mean, science is one of the most trusted professions among many. Massimiano mentioned journalists, for example, are very, the lowest are politicians and real estate people, usually. And the highest, yes, it's true, and the highest is science and people, fire workers, les pompiers, fireworks. They are considered very, very, very trustworthy. And so you see, and that's quite a stable result that didn't change that much, even during COVID. Even we had a sort of crisis during COVID. It was not exactly a crisis of trust in science. It was a political crisis, a general political crisis that touched, of course, also to trust. But despite these sort of very stable findings that we all have the perception there is a sort of dominant narrative these days that there is a crisis of trust in general, that people are less rational than they used to be, and they trust less in science than they used to be. Of course, this narrative well predates the COVID pandemic and may alter people's views about scientists. So it is therefore important to revisit this narrative and provide robust empirical evidence on whether it is accurate. I think that Massimiano did the job for me too. Also, he's a sociologist. I'm a philosopher, so he's more familiar with surveys and statistics that I am. This thing doesn't work very well. Okay. So, as I was saying, and these are results that he also mentioned, 83% of people in Europe say that see the overall influence of science and technology as positive, which is interesting. Also, technology, given even in a situation in which, AI and all this technological field raises a lot of anxiety, and so people, we have the perception that maybe people are not so positive about all these big changes that are ahead for us in Europe, and still people believe that the changes are for the better. And 2/3 said in the Eurobarometer 2025, these are big surveys around Europe, so that's, of course, surveys is not knock down science. There is a margin of interpretation, etc. But basically, it's a strong tool that we use to just catch the perceptions of the population. And 67% think that technology improves people's lives and make lives easier, etc., etc. So there is not an exact crisis of trust in science, but there is something that we perceive as problematic. That it is better to try to understand. So, what is really in crisis is trust in politics. This is something that really went down in the last 15 years. I would say there is a first big event that is 2008, the financial crisis. From the beginning of the 2000s, you see sort of perturbations related to basically to globalization. But 2008 is a big moment, I mean, of loss of trust in the political elites. And of course, COVID. And that was a big clash, a moment of big clash in Europe with a political. I live in France. France was particularly sort of tense about during the years of COVID. France is a quite highly educated country compared to the rest of Europe. And it was the first one in terms of anti-vax attitudes, which were really probably just attitudes, because in the end, the French just vaccinated, the majority of French people vaccinated, so they were sort of signaling something with their anti-vax attitude, but in the end they vaccinated. So, but it was clearly very, very tense. There were sort of quite, there was a, I don't know, a big success of some charlatans like Dr. Raoult, who became a superstar at the beginning of COVID by claiming that hydroxychloroquine could cure COVID, and had a big number of followers, especially in Marseille, where he was based. And so all this was a sort of political exploitation of science, etc. So clearly there was something, there was a lot of agitation in Europe around these themes, especially in countries in which political life is almost always agitated, like France, but not only in France. I mean, it was not the only country that was in this state, but it was quite interesting. So clearly, I mean, there is something about the lack of trust today. I mean, the sort of the diminishing of trust that has much more to do with politics than science. And why COVID was interesting? Because COVID was one of the special moments in which science touches politics. I mean, we had science that decided for the policy making in every country. I mean, that was, I mean, the directives were given, basically, were not imposed, but the recommendation came from the World Health Organization. Basically, every country appointed a committee of experts for decision-making on this topic. And so science really, and also the science was hyper-exposed. It was very, very interesting for people like me or like Massimiano, people who work on these issues. I worked in my life a lot on experts, for example. And so we had, like, I don't know, articles, papers from journals, peer-reviewed journals like The Lancet, translated and published on Le Monde. This is something never seen before. I mean, usually the peer-reviewed literature has its own life, and only basically specialists have access to this. And so it was really new. So it was an incredible cocktail, explosive cocktail of interaction of science and politics that made things much more complicated than in the usual business. But of course, you have this kind of crisis the more and more. I mean, COVID was spectacular, but we have it on the climate change side, on the pesticide side. So many political decisions that need science to be made, I mean, just create a sort of distrust of science and a suspicion of who are the experts, who are appointment. Of course, I mean, especially when sciences are social sciences like economics. Economics is one of the expertise that is most challenged by the public, because you can always say, well, but this guy or this girl comes from a certain economic school, so she or he has a certain political agenda, ideological agenda to defend a cut of taxes or a raise of taxes, etc., etc. So I think so I think that in general what we have, it's not that we have faced a decrease of trust in science, but what we have, what we are assisting at is a sort of rise of a certain, what I called, and I wrote about this, called epistemic populism. What is epistemic populism? It's a sort of political epistemic stance that emphasizes the legitimacy and primacy of a non-expert judgment in determining what counts as knowledge or truth within a public life. So especially when science tells you things that are very distant from your perception, your experience. I don't know, I see in France, in which we are facing a major crisis, political crisis, and statistics tell you that immigrants don't impact that much, I don't know, the job market in France, and people in certain regions see immigrants have a different perception. This different perception, they want to be legitimized. They want to be taken into account, even if it is not scientific in the sense there are no statistics or no data that support it. So epistemic populism is something like, I want my way of perceiving things as just taken into account. I don't care if it is scientific or not. It's just my stance on reality, my take on reality. I want that someone just takes care of it. And this was, something very well perceived by populistic movements in Europe. If they have a common ground, these movements that are very different, is this ability to take into account how people feel about things, how people perceive things against data called statistics and scientific results, etc., etc. So there is something of this kind that is circulates. It doesn't mean that people don't trust science. It means that they want also their own perception and their own vision of things to be considered and taken into account. I worked during COVID. I worked a lot during COVID. It was a very productive period of my life. For example, on Sweden. Sweden didn't enforce the lockdown, and not even mask and nothing. And the person who did it, they had a number of deaths that was more important than the other Scandinavian countries, that is Norway and Finland and Denmark. But in the end, the public was with this guy, Anders Tegnell, who was the guy who didn't. Why? Because this is a very strong value for Swedish people. It's a part of the constitution of Sweden that you cannot just block the movement of the population. It's such a felt thing for Swedish people. Also, maybe Swedish people are more disciplined than French or Italian, so it's easy to keep them free, than in a city like Paris or in Rome, etc. But anyway, so the thing was totally backed by the population, who accepted even a raise in deaths to keep this fundamental value of Swedish people, that is autonomy, freedom, etc., etc. So, and also in general, I don't want to be, I think that we have the tendency to criticize those who don't accept science, or consider them either ignorant or irrational or ideological, etc. I think that epistemic populism has something it's just, we should try to understand why people reason in this way and why people are so attached to their own sort of vision of things, vision of the world, vision of life. I think that they perceive that our democracies are the more and more becoming technocracies, and so they are losing control, as we have, Massimiano has said already, they are losing control of the reason on which decisions are made. Massimiano is an expert of communication science. Communication science has been an ancient sort of ambition in France. For example, in Paris, you have a wonderful Palais de la Découverte, which shows the planets and more contemporary things like the DNA, the structure, etc. You cannot have something like this for AI. You cannot have, because nobody knows how the LLM works. You cannot explain to children with a simple model how AI works. So really we are in a very opaque world in which decisions are made on the basis of things that we don't understand. And so a little bit of standing back is understandable. So I just want to conclude, because I'm being too long. I just go there because I don't see what I've written. So I think that there is something of a disconnection. There is no clear sign of lack of trust in science, but something is happening. That's not that we are all crazy and we see things that are not. There's something happening. I think that basically the lack of trust depends on politics and not on science. And the huge sort of use today of politics in mature democracies that are that are technocracies of science. So, there is a sort of opacity of choice. If you base the choice of the productivity for the next 30 years on AI and data centers, people just don't get it. Just don't get it, and probably politicians don't get it either. So this is something that creates anxiety and mistrust. So science is perceived untrustworthy when it is connected with politics. So we mentioned the case of COVID, and of course, when these two things touch, there are distrust of Higgs bosons is very low everywhere in Europe and in the world. People just trust the fact that someone discovered the Higgs boson. Distrust of pesticides is much higher because these are things that matter to us, that matter to farmers, and they change their lives and the cost of their lives, etc. Also, I would distinguish, and these things are distinguished in the literature, in epistemological literature, between disinformation, which Massimiano is right, is sometimes exaggerated. Of course, there is disinformation, but people, when the stakes are high, people just try to find the good sources, etc. They are not completely in the hands of fake news, etc. And another phenomenon is knowledge resistance, things that you don't want to know. Just even if you're told that you're going to die tomorrow, but you prefer not to know. And the knowledge resistance was very typical of anti-vax. Knowledge resistance is very typical of climate change, in which you have to really change, for example, your habits. You don't want to change your habits, your way of living, etc. And you don't want to think that your kids won't survive because the world has, 30 years perspective of survival. And so you just don't want to think about these things, or you don't want to know that Europe is under threat from foreign powers, etc., etc. So you resist to know. The information is there, but you resist to know. These two things must be kept distinguished. Well, I wrote a lot about little advertisement of some of my books that are on these themes. What I think that the major crisis of trust is a crisis of authority. I mean, a lot of information, the enormous amount of information that we have makes very difficult to pry apart what is good and what is bad. I mean, paradoxically, the more information you have, the more you need trust and reputation. The more you need someone who tells you this is the good source and this is not. Because, and even for the debates, even for the moments of discussion, the enormous amount of information makes really easy to find some sort of confirmation of your hypothesis, because everything is there. So if you are against the elimination of pesticides, you're going to find an article that defends pesticide somewhere on the web. So it becomes very, very difficult to, there is a sort of risk, more than a risk of general gullibility, there is a risk of general skepticism, in which people just basically don't trust anymore anything. They don't take it seriously, anything, because they don't know how to pick the right information. Well, solution, that's really very complicated. I worked on some possible solution of very partial problems. For example, transparency. People don't know. I saw this during COVID, and we worked a lot at the European level during COVID. People really didn't know how these experts in the committees were selected. And basically, it was super opaque. We did a study comparing 3 countries, France, Italy, and UK, and the criteria were totally mysterious. I mean, the only country in which trust in science is high and trust in politics is even higher is Norway. And these kind of procedures are completely transparent. Citizens know how these people have been selected. And in France, it was impossible to know, even with sort of cold indicators like H index, etc. These people were not the best, and so the public is confused. I mean, these people decided of our lives. I mean, we were locked down for almost 1.5 years and couldn't go out for a walk. I mean, so it's big decisions. So transparency is very important. There is no clear sort of device, legal political device to appoint experts and to be sure that, for example, a proposal of a new law is made on the basis of expertise, etc. Of course, scientists are very bad in science communication, so Massimiano works on this. Science communication, I told you, it's an old thing. I mean, it exists at least since the Enlightenment. But we need to find new formats, new way, which would be much easier if the third point was realized, like the free access to all scientific information. This is the most incredible paradox that Massimiano has already mentioned of our societies. We are just here saying, well, there is no trust in science, etc. Europe has enforced open access like 25 years ago, so each one of us who writes a research paper is obliged to put it on a open archive, but the journals exist, still exist, and the people, and you cannot put the same version that you put online on the journal. So the last version, the one that is really validated, is still under paywall. And guess what? AIs, ChatGPT, etc., don't go even there. Even them cannot go beyond the paywall. So they don't read Nature. They read PubMed, which is okay, but it's not Nature. You know. So this is just absurd. I mean, we want quality. Let's sort of invade the web with quality stuff. Same thing for newspapers and journals. Everything that is very high quality is under paywall. Of course, it's much more difficult to ask the Financial Times to be free. I mean, it's much more difficult. But clearly, for the research papers, that should be like the first reflex. I mean, everything should be accessible, even for AI, because AI then is trained on what it reads, and it doesn't read the good stuff. Yeah, and also science, there is also a more general point. I would say science has been heavily politicized in the last, I would say, 30 years. I really followed the process. And so it is considered today an appendix of a political decision-making and political problem-solving. And so I think that maybe we need to re-enchant a little bit the image of science. Science is not only a sort of decision-making help for power, it's also a counter-power which can reveal truth and alternative truth, not in the sense of alternative facts, I mean, truth that are not said, for example, by the power, and so I think there is a sort of bureaucratization of science also that makes people perceive it as just a little group of pundits that help politicians to make decisions. This is never a good image. But of course, I don't have a perfect solution, but I think there are many directions in which we can clearly advance. And I stop here. Okay.
Thank you very much, Gloria, and thank you, everyone. I wanted to thank again Massimiano. I just want to ask you some questions, and after that we will open the discussion to the audience. And I would like to ask you, Massimiano, if you are there, about Gloria's presentation, because there are a lot of things in common, but there are some things that are not just as in common. And of course, this is a disputatio, a debate, so I will love you both to debate. Massimiano is there? Or is not?
I'm here.
Oh, okay. Hi, thank you. So I would like to ask you about some things that Gloria said, just to know if you are if you agree with her. This kind of vision of the politics influencing science and causing this epistemic populism that she talked about. Do you agree that we are in this situation right now?
I'm not a political scientist. I'm sure Gloria has much more knowledge than I have on this topic. What I see from the data, which I think we should really be worried about, it's a dramatic crisis of politics. And I mean, this is evident. I don't know what are the data in Spain, but we just had the regional elections in Italy. 60% of people don't go to vote. This is a very concrete and dramatic sign of the crisis of politics. And so I don't see a crisis of trust in science. I see, of course, I see political leaders and policymakers and social movements who want to instrumentalize expertise. But this is indirectly, it's a sign of the power and authority of science. Because nobody says, you know, we took this decision because we don't care about the science. No, they want another science. They want other scientists. If you remember the Novaks, I mean, who they were calling to support their views? Professor Montagnier, a Nobel laureate. This is an indirect sign that, you know, that science is a powerful thing. So I agree with Professor Origgi. I see many problems, and I said I'm not competent in analyze. I'm just worried as a citizen that about the contemporary crisis of politics in democracies. But I think it is not specific about science. It is more about the politics.
I don't know, Gloria, if you want to.
Oh, yeah, sure. That is part of what I said at the beginning of my talk. I mean, that it's the crisis of trust in politics that is major. I mean, and we don't have data about a major crisis of trust in science. But given the sort of proximity of politics and science in particular situation, like we have had the experience of COVID, but in France, I mean, France is a very interesting laboratory. We had Gilets jaunes the year before COVID, and basically it was again, I mean, the tax that was proposed was a tax sort of to protect climate, I mean, an ecological tax. And so it was a clash, a political clash, but also based on proposing that tax was depended on a sort of scientific expertise about climate change and etc. So what I was saying is just when science touches politics, when science is close to political decision making, well, it can be just non-accepted, even if people think, I mean, in general, that they like science and they are totally okay with a scientific view of the world.
Mm-hmm. You both mentioned the quality and also the access of scientific information as very important. But I am thinking of the US. I mean, it's the biggest country in the world, the most important country in the world. Probably is the one with the most important scientific institutions in the world, with the best newspapers and the best information and a lot of social media. And we have a person that is an anti-vaccine supported in the CDCs. And we have the US population, actually, we have this crisis of populism, I believe, that is very, very big right now in the US. But they do have a lot of scientists that are very important, and they do have very good media and information. So what is happening in the US? And can this happen also in Europe? Could we have this enormous crisis just to have an anti-vaccine maker in the place where vaccines are made? It preoccupies me a lot. I don't know, Gloria.
I'm going also, Massimiano wants to go first. I mean, it's a very, the anti-science thing in United States is very complex to understand. Everybody's clear. I mean, nobody has a clear-cut explanation why people, especially old people like Trump, are interested in cutting cancer research. I mean, it's just like seems totally irrational, etc. Clearly, it has to do with a certain power of the elite. Science in the United States is made in sort of the elite university. The best science is made in the elite universities, and this is a big target for this administration. Just, I mean, you remember J.D. Vance, there is a speech in which he says universities just should be shut down. I mean, they are completely useless, etc. So there is an idea of replacing. And also, I think there is all this dark side coming from the tech world, etc., all these big tech people, in which they think that the methodology of how science is done today is basically over. I mean, there will be new things with AI, etc., and all these people, all these experts that we're paying with public money, etc., they're going to be. And but I don't think that this is enough to get the overall picture of why they are so skeptical about science.
Massimiano?
I do not know enough American politics to give a short answer. What I see again is anti-intellectualism, probably based on the perception by certain politicians that intellectuals are kind of supporting the rivals in politics. So I think it's a perception of political alignment of the elites. Whether it is correct, I don't know. But what I see, not in United States maybe, but more in authoritarian regimes, I mean, obviously they have a problem with science, but this has been demonstrated by Robert Merton almost a century ago, because science is a particular type of institution which doesn't work, which only works properly if it has a certain autonomy. It needs resources from politics, particularly in our age, taxpayers' money, but it needs some independence or a certain amount of independence for politics. So it's a very delicate relationship. And of course, we have seen this, I mean, clearly in Nazi Germany, in the Soviet Union, that if you push this invasion of politics too much, then science doesn't work so well anymore, particularly in a certain sense.
Mm-hmm. And do you think it's a problem also of understanding? I mean, of being something that is complicated to understand? I was remembering Carl Sagan saying that this very famous phrase that we have arranged a global civilization in which most crucial elements depend on science and technology, that no one understands science and technology, and that's as a recipe for disaster. He said that. I don't know if you agree, but maybe there's also a problem of people not understanding how science works.
If we consider the results that Massimiano has presented, science literacy didn't decrease at least in Europe, but I don't know if Massimiano you have data also for United States. I don't think in United States either. I mean, I have data about, for example, mathematical competences. For example, in France, they seem to go down, but basically, so it's not the. I'm not sure. I don't think that people don't understand science. Maybe what is more difficult today is to understand the aims. In general, the aims of science. I think that people feel, I don't know, I don't have just in personal conversations, but even like political conversation. I work a lot with the political institutions in France. And for example, with AI, we are sort of pushed, we are all obliged to follow this thing, but nobody has clearly in mind what's good about. I mean, it's very confusing. I mean, it's so maybe it's more about the general aim that is more difficult to understand intuitively, but this is just a guess.
Okay, Massimiano?
I think we should be careful not to think that trust and respect for science is dependent on the understanding of science content, because it doesn't work like that. I mean, trust is precisely about that. I mean, for most of us, science has become so complex, it is a black box. We don't know about the content. We just rely on the competence and the experts and the independence and the funding of science, and expect certain types of results, which can be basic knowledge, can be practical applications. I mean, if we would have to be competent on any specific topic as citizens, I mean, most of the scientists are incompetent about most of the rest of the science. I mean, so they are just specialized in the small little thing. And again, this is a problem we have seen in the pandemic, right? Immunologists talking about pedagogy, what should we do with schools, and this kind of thing. This is one of the communicative effects, that once you're visible, you get asked like Einstein himself complained, I get asked all sorts of things, which I don't know anything about. So this is one of the dimensions of expertise. But I said, we should disentangle this from the understanding, which of course is a good thing. I mean, I'm not claiming more ignorance. I think we should communicate science for many good reasons, like also cultural appreciation, enjoyment. It's beautiful, it's interesting, it can be funny, but not for the purpose of convincing people to accept certain political choices.
Mm-hmm. So I have a lot of questions for both of them, but I will open right now the questions for the audience. We have like 10 minutes or 15 minutes for you if you want to ask or say something to our very, very competent experts. I don't know, we have a microphone or something? Yes, over there. So if anyone wants to say anything to here, perdona, aquí, to Jaume, this one, yes, the boss. Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Massimo. Thank you very much, Gloria. At the very end, it seems that what is really important is the self-perception of what you are in between the whole knowledge. In that sense, maybe your idea of epistemic populism that you have so well explained, it's psychologically, it could be at the base of this success in what I say is gonna be important, if we think that maybe all these people feel themselves as prophets. So if I am a prophet, I'm going to convince much more people than if I sit down and I tell people plain things without lots of add up. So if I am only rational, I'm not going to success in convincing people. But if I feel I am a prophet and I convince people that I am a prophet, maybe things will spread much faster and the populism will succeed. So everything could be at the very end a pure psychological problem.
Well, there are clearly many psychological effects that influence how information flows. But, for example, there are very interesting studies made basically by economists with psychologists, but I mean it's behavioral economists on emotions and information. They are very interesting. Like, for example, if you are in a situation of fear, as in the case of COVID, basically you search more information. You're pushed to search more information. If you're in a situation of hate, of anger, you stop. You don't search for more information. You just stop. You say, he's the cause of all the problems, and I'm angry with, and that's a very subtle effect, but it's very interesting to see how emotions can be cognitively, can induce really epistemic states, I mean, and change our epistemic life. But when you say, for example, if you're a prophet, maybe things you influence more people, etc. Well, I'm not sure that it works like that. Clearly, I mean, there is a lot of propaganda and rhetoric that is used in communication today. And also, I wouldn't encourage rational people to use the same means. I mean, in a sense, I think that it's important to, if we have to convince people about things, for example, about the usefulness of science, it would be nice to convince them through their critical faculties, and if it is still possible.
There's another one. Allí, ¿no? Y ahí detrás otra ahora.
I have a very simple question, because I think all the arguments make a lot of sense, but I'm having a difficulty to identify which of these arguments are new and which ones have been or have existed in the past. So are we talking a matter of the magnitude? So if we think about the use of science by politicians, this has happened during the, it's not a new thing right now. So is it because now it's more intense, or are there particular arguments that are specific of this time that make this situation more relevant than it was in the past?
I don't know if Massimiano maybe, do you want to answer?
I think one of the things we saw, Gloria has mentioned that the COVID pandemic was probably the most spectacular example of science communication in the history of mankind. We never had so much science on primetime television and social media. I think one of the new thing was that we had access to science in its making, rather than science already packaged for public consumption or political decision. We had seen a little bit of that already in cases like climate science, but this was much dramatic. And other than that, I would agree with you that particularly since the Second World War, or even before, politics has used scientific expertise in a number of ways, and it still does so. It's very hard to, particularly if you think about politics, for example, at the European level, to find a politician say, we just don't care about the science. They may hate individually some scientists as a symbol of something, or, as I said, because they perceive them as politically aligned with another parts, but they wouldn't publicly claim they ignore, they willingly ignore expertise.
There's another question over there.
Thank you very much for many thought-provoking observations and reflections. I have 2 points. One concerns your demand at the end of your presentation that you said we should re-enchant science as the disinterested, politics-free search for truth. I would like to put a little warning out here that philosophy of science and history of science and sociology of science of the last century or so has shown that science is, while it is very good, also something that has often failed, and whatever progress in knowledge it has achieved were hard-fought achievements that take scientists a lot of time, and that it is better to inform the public about all the pitfalls that scientific research faces all the time, all the failures of, to name a recent debate, failures of replication in the social sciences, in clinical research. People need to learn about that. So have, to use the subtitle of a book that's now 30 years old, I think, by the philosopher Philip Pitcher, we must teach science without legend and scientific objectivity without illusions. So that's what I would say. I think that's also a better idea of, a reflective idea of science. Another thing that could be done, particularly in science education at schools, but also at universities, is to remind people of something that is not very well known, namely that the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights has a right to science as a foundational human right. And if people knew that and understood what it means, for instance, it means the right to participate in science, the right of scientists to do research that is unaffected by political or other vested interests, the right of the public to receive research that is done in a responsible and ethically responsible manner, and the right of the public to use scientific research where it's certified enough. I think that if people would learn that science is an open system, and that science is something that they have a right to. That might help to reduce some of the disenfranchisement between science and society. I wonder what your thoughts are.
Okay, I don't know if there's anyone else over there. Ayib? Gracias.
Hi there. I have a question related to independence. I think all of us might agree that with industry-funded research, there are particular interests at heart. Obviously, the government is also, or governments, plural, also have their own interests. For example, when you think of how the Trump administration has now lashed out against the use of Tylenol during pregnancy, linking it to autism, etc. I think most experts would agree that there's a large difference between observational studies and randomized controlled trials. But what is surprising to me is even among science communicators, sometimes I fail to see that independence in the way information is transmitted to the public. So I'm wondering if the speakers, also yourself, Patricia, given your expertise in this field, if you could reflect a bit on the need for independence also in science communication, not just in terms of science itself, funding sources, et cetera, but the way information is transmitted. Thank you.
Sure.
I think that Massimiano is the expert of science communication much more than I am.
I totally agree. I mean, it's. I mentioned the issue of quality of science communication. Accuracy is one of the dimensions of quality. We often think about accuracy, but it's not the only one. It is, for example, independence, transparency. When we hear the communication of a research institution or university, what it is about? It is about disseminating the results for the public, for general audiences. It is about self-promotion. It is about branding. These aims are often mixed in a not very clear way. So I would emphasize that we don't need more science communication. We need better science communication. And better science communication doesn't only mean accurate. Of course, accuracy is important, but there are other dimensions of quality.
And as for me, as a journalist, it's very complicated. The work for a science journalist is really complicated because it's very, very tense and it's very complicated, and there's a lot of issues related with time and space and the formation of the journalist that affects the communication. But anyway, just to make it simple, I don't think independence is one of the issues. There's a lot of issues, and the formation of the people, the education, the space, as I said, the pressures. But in the independence, I don't think from the journalistic point of view is a problem. Almost every journalist, science journalist I know, they are independent from industry or political pressures. But there are a lot of issues that we can discuss forever. But right now, I don't think independence is one of them. Another question, and I think it's the last one.
Thank you. So since I'm sitting here and I have that banner in front of me.
Excuse me, I have
yes, a little bit hard.
Since I'm sitting here and I have that banner in front of me, then the questions, it's natural, come naturally to me. What is the role of learned society, like the academias, in this crisis, and what could be the role looking ahead?
That's a very good question. I think it goes in my direction of openness, transparency, make all the possible results and endeavors, etc., available to the public. Just make it is true that there is a lot of stuff that circulates already, but I mean, the more the better. I mean, the web is a very complex environment, but at least it is infinite. So The only thing, if you want to have a quality space in terms of scientific information, the more you share, the better it is. I mean, I would say that the institution, even universities, I mean, of course, Academia Europaea and each university, the networks we put together each time we are in a European project, etc., just try to be visible and transparent and share the most possible amount of information.
Massimiano, I don't know if you have anything else?
Big academies could play a very important role, but one of the challenges we see right now is also between individual communication by individual scientists, for example, through social media, and communication by science as a community, so to say, or institutional communication. And we have seen a number of tension arising from this. So I think this should be one of the topics, and also working with the scientists would be important to get them to understand the new responsibilities in the new landscape of communication that they have when they jump into the arena of public communication.
Okay, so I think we are done. I want to thank I want to thank, of course, our brilliant speakers. Massimiano, over there, thank you. And now we'll see you in Barcelona next time, I'm pretty sure. And Gloria, thank you for your research, your insights, and your stimulating conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you to the Academia Europaea, to the Barcelona Hub. Thank you to the Barcelona City Hall for hosting us in this magnificent space. Thank you to our musicians, and we are going to have another performance right now. And thank you all of you for your discussion of very, very interesting questions. Thank you so much. And we are going to, yes, to pass to the musicians again. Thank you. Now, it's a composition from Alex Caminal. Thank you very much.
Moltíssimes gràcies a tots per l'assistència, als ponents, a la moderadora i als músics. Moltíssimes gràcies, Aleix, per haver-nos regalat aquesta obra. Now we have a small reception outside to the right, so we can talk for a while. Thank you. Thank you to you all.